Move it, old man. Some of us have jobs to get to. He didn't respond, not a word. Just wiped the side mirror with a faded cloth, opened the bus door with a practiced motion, and waited. Same boots, same silence, every single day. But that morning, something shifted. A young recruit, fresh uniform, sharp haircut, boots still creaking, paused as he stepped aboard. His gaze landed on the driver's forearm. Just below the rolled sleeve, partially faded and worn by years of sun and time, was a tattoo. But not just any ink. The seal trident. The recruit froze, mid-step. His back straightened instinctively, spine snapping to attention. That symbol was sacred, instantly recognizable. Earned, never given. No rookie could miss it. The driver didn't flinch. He simply muttered in a gravel-toned voice, "Clock's ticking, sailor." And the entire bus went quiet. Not the quiet of boredom or morning fatigue, but the silence that falls when something unspoken hangs heavy in the air, something you don't fully understand, but you feel. If you believe real legends never introduce themselves, you'll want to keep listening. Bus 12 arrived at exactly 5:45 a.m. every morning. No exceptions, rain or shine, winter or summer, holidays, floods, blackouts. It didn't matter. The route never changed, and neither did the man behind the wheel. He looked like he belonged in another era. Mid-70s, weathered face, lines deep as riverbeds. His eyes, cold thunderclouds that had seen too many storms and forgotten more than most people would ever know. The badge on his jacket read simply, Thomas. But nobody at the depot ever called him that. To the other drivers, he was old-timer, or just boots. A nod to the heavy military-style footwear he wore every day, in quiet defiance of the standard-issue uniform. His faded navy jacket bore no patches, no insignia. And yet, somehow, it sat on him with unmistakable authority, like it belonged on a battlefield, not a bus route. One of the younger drivers, Davis, once muttered while watching Thomas go through his meticulous morning routine, "Surprised they haven't forced him to retire. Probably can't even see over the steering wheel anymore." But Thomas's routine never changed. Left sleeve always rolled just below the elbow, not high enough to be unprofessional, but precise, deliberate, as if to keep something hidden, or maybe not quite. Davis laughed, watching from a distance. He's like a machine. Same route, same steps, same face, probably dreams in bus schedules. What Davis didn't know, and the depot manager rarely mentioned, was this. Thomas had never been late. Not once, not in 12 years, not during the blizzard of 2018, when most of the city shut down, not during the downtown flood, when roads turned into rivers, not even during the union strike, when half the transit fleet called in sick. That particular morning, as Bus 12 rolled through the Naval District, a new recruit stepped aboard. Clean uniform, ramrod posture, haircut so fresh it still smelled like talcum powder. "Good morning, sir," the young man said automatically, military courtesy embedded in his DNA. Thomas flicked his eyes up to the mirror. A heartbeat of recognition. Then back to the road. No response. The recruit found a seat near the front, one of only 3 passengers at that hour, and began watching the driver. Closely. It started with small things. The way Thomas's eyes scanned all 3 mirrors in constant rhythm. The precise movement of his hands as he shifted gears. No wasted energy. The subtle adjustment of his back before every single turn, like muscle memory tuned by years of training. Then, at the Market Street stop, an elderly woman boarded with grocery bags. One tore open halfway up the steps. Apples clattered across the floor. Thomas said nothing. Just set the brake, powered down the engine, stepped out of the driver's seat, and knelt down. He gathered every apple with methodical care, not rushed, not annoyed, efficient, silent. When finished, he simply nodded at the woman's breathless thanks and returned to his seat. The young recruit narrowed his eyes. Something wasn't right. This wasn't how a regular bus driver moved. As the morning ride continued, the recruit couldn't stop watching him. Thomas drove like a man on patrol, each movement calculated, calm, and deliberate. The world might have thought he was just some old driver running a city route. But this recruit, he was trained to spot discipline when he saw it, and everything about Thomas spoke of something more. Most of the other passengers didn't notice. They were absorbed in their screens, headphones, or half-asleep stares out the window. They saw an old man with gray hair and stiff hands. Nothing more. But the recruit studied the posture that never slouched, the eyes that never rested, and the presence that somehow filled the entire front of the bus without a single word. When he disembarked at the naval training facility, he paused, looked back toward the driver's seat. "Thank you for the ride, sir." Thomas didn't turn, but in the rearview mirror, their eyes met, just for a second, before shifting back to the road. The next morning dawned with sharp sunlight breaking across the base. The recruit boarded again, this time with quiet determination. He took the same seat near the front, positioning himself where the rising sun would fall across the driver's left side. He watched, waited. As the bus turned east, light streamed through the glass, catching the skin of Thomas's forearm. There it was, worn and faded with time, the outline still unmistakable, the trident, an anchor, an eagle, the seal insignia. The recruit's breath caught. He waited until the next stop, until the front of the bus was empty again, then leaned forward just slightly. "Sir," he said quietly, voice pitched only for Thomas to hear. "Were you in—" He didn't finish the question. Didn't need to. The pause stretched out long, wrapped in the hum of the engine and the rhythm of tires on pavement. Finally, Thomas spoke, without looking away from the road. "I was—" 2 words. But the recruit sat back, his shoulders straight. He didn't need anything more. The silence between them shifted. It wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the silence of recognition, of 2 men wearing the same weight, separated by years but connected by something timeless. By that afternoon, word had already started to spread. Not officially, just murmurs. A text here, a message there, group chats among trainees lit up, barracks buzzed. "The old guy driving bus 12? Former frogman, SEAL trident visible." "You sure?" "Harper saw it himself. Driver confirmed. Just said, 'I was.'" Within days, a post appeared on a Navy subreddit. "There's a legend driving bus 12 in Coronado. Recognize the ink. Anyone know his story?" One reply caught attention. "Looks like Thomas Griggs." Name rings a bell. Didn't he vanish off radar years ago? That name, Griggs, tugged at the memory of retired Chief Petty Officer Marcus Denton. He hadn't heard it in decades, but he remembered the stories. Quiet ones, told late at night during long deployments. Stories of a commander who never raised his voice but never lost a man unless he had no choice. Who walked into missions with impossible odds and came back because the mission wasn't over until he said it was. Denton picked up the phone and made a call to an old teammate, one who worked now, at the Pentagon. That Saturday morning, something was different. When Thomas pulled up to the Naval District stop, the platform was no longer empty. 8 recruits stood in perfect formation. No one spoke, no one saluted. Each boarded silently, offering a simple, respectful nod. One, forgetting himself in the moment, started to raise a hand in salute, but stopped, flushing red. Thomas didn't react. His face, as always, stayed neutral, but this time, his eyes lingered a little longer on each young face. Monday arrived with a stillness in the air, the kind that precedes a shift in atmosphere. When Bus 12 pulled up at 0545 sharp, Thomas noticed them immediately. This time, not just recruits, but higher ranks mixed in, and sitting quietly in the third row was a man in full dress uniform, crisp, immaculate, purposeful, Lieutenant Colonel James Westfield, Naval Intelligence Officer, SEAL historian. He didn't speak as he boarded, just nodded and took a seat directly behind Thomas. The other passengers, military and civilian alike, sat straighter. After several long minutes of silent driving, Westfield leaned forward, his voice pitched just above the hum of the engine. I reviewed the files. Commander Griggs. SEAL Team 2. 3 tours. Bronze Star with Valor. Listed MIA twice. Both times found. You completed your mission, despite injuries. Thomas's knuckles whitened slightly on the wheel. For a moment, he said nothing. That man retired a long time ago, Colonel. With respect, sir, Westfield replied evenly. That's not how it works, and you know that better than most. There was no answer. Just the road ahead. Later that afternoon, Westfield made the quiet confirmation others had only speculated about. Bus 12's silent driver wasn't just any veteran. He was Commander Thomas Griggs, one of the most respected SEAL leaders from Vietnam. A man whose classified missions filled redacted pages in military archives. A man whose name hadn't been spoken publicly in years, but whose legend had never really left the teams. The base didn't issue a press release. There was no announcement. But word spread anyway, like current beneath the surface. By Wednesday, when Thomas pulled up to his first stop at the naval base, 15 recruits stood waiting in formation. Some he'd never seen before. One even had a ranger tab tucked into his pocket. They boarded in silence. Each nodded once. No one said a word. Thomas drove with the same precision, the same focus. But when they reached the training facility, something changed. In the rearview mirror, his eyes found one recruit. Harper, the original one. The one who'd first noticed the trident. Harper, Thomas said quietly. The name hung in the air like a note. Harper blinked, stunned to be recognized. Maintain your situational awareness during night exercises, Thomas added. That's where most recruits fail. Harper straightened in his seat. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. When the recruits filed out, the silence had a new weight. Not cold, not distant, but earned. The story of Commander Thomas Griggs didn't explode like some headline. It spread like fog over the ocean, slow, creeping, undeniable. Within 2 weeks, every military member in town knew. There was a legend driving Bus 12, and he never said a word about it. A retired serviceman tipped off a local news reporter who approached Thomas as he completed his post-shift inspection. Commander Griggs, we'd love to do a feature. Your story could inspire thousands. Thomas didn't pause. No interviews, he said, checking tire pressure with practiced precision. And it's just Thomas now. The reporter persisted. But young sailors could benefit from your experience. That's when Thomas turned to him, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. Young sailors need to focus on their own stories, not mine. He walked away, but his silence only made people listen harder. Military publications reached out. Writers sent respectful letters. Podcasters asked for a quote. All received the same answer. Nothing. At the transit center, a supervisor quietly arranged for a bronze plaque to be installed next to the bulletin board where schedules hung. It read, "In honor of Commander Griggs, whose silence taught more than words ever could." Thomas didn't acknowledge it, but passengers noticed that the next morning he stood even straighter at his post, if such a thing was possible. Word trickled beyond the base. Local veterans began receiving more respectful nods in stores. Bartenders stood a little straighter when sailors walked in. For once, "Thank you for your service" wasn't a formality. It had weight behind it. High school students, inspired by whispered rumors and secondhand stories, started asking questions in class. One teacher, whose father had served in the Navy, created a curriculum unit called Modern-Day Valor and Silence. It focused on how heroism often continued long after the uniform came off, and how sometimes the most powerful service came from just showing up every day. Then came the Tuesday rainstorm. It was heavy, the kind of downpour that cloaked the streets in mist and silence. Bus 12 pulled up to its stop as usual, but one man boarded alone. He wore a tailored civilian suit, but his bearing was unmistakable. You didn't need a uniform to see it, military through and through. Thomas's eyes flicked briefly in recognition. Senator James Morrison, former SEAL, head of the Armed Services Committee. He didn't speak, just took a seat halfway down the aisle, silent and still. The entire ride passed without a word. Then, as the senator disembarked, he turned and placed something carefully on the dashboard, a challenge coin bearing the insignia of SEAL Team 2. Same unit, same era. Thomas didn't move, but the coin remained on that dashboard every day thereafter. Harper, now nearing the end of his initial training, had begun keeping a journal, unofficial, personal. He wrote, "Every day I ride that bus, I learn what discipline looks like in motion. Commander Griggs doesn't teach with words. He demonstrates with every turn of the wheel." Another recruit once asked Thomas about his most heroic moment. Thomas had answered without pausing, "Showing up the next day." The recruit frowned, not understanding. Harper later explained, "He means courage isn't a one-time thing. It's about showing up again. When you're tired, when you're sore, when no one's watching, that's the kind that matters." Thomas never acknowledged the growing reverence. But when he looked into the rearview mirror and met the eyes of his military passengers, there was always something unspoken between them. A bond made not of words, but of understanding. "Move it, old man. Some of us have jobs." He didn't answer, just wiped the side mirror and opened the door. Same boots, same silence. Every day. But that morning was different. A SEAL recruit froze mid-step. On the driver's forearm, barely visible beneath weathered skin and faded freckles, was a tattoo no rookie could mistake. The SEAL trident. The recruit snapped to attention. The driver muttered, just loud enough to hear, "Clock's ticking, sailor." The entire bus fell silent. Bus 12 pulled in at 5:45 a.m. sharp, every single morning, rain or shine, never a minute early, never a second late. Its driver was a man in his 70s, weathered face, eyes like distant thunderclouds, never smiled, never spoke unless necessary. His name badge said Thomas, but no one called him that. Around the depot they knew him as Boots, a nod to the old military footwear he still wore instead of company-issued shoes. His navy blue jacket had no patches, no name tags. Yet it sat on him like a uniform. "Surprised they haven't forced him to retire," muttered Davis, one of the younger drivers, watching Thomas inspect the bus with slow precision. "Probably can't even see over the wheel anymore." But what Davis didn't know, what most didn't, was this. Thomas had never been late. Not once. Not during the blizzard of 2018. Not during the downtown flood. Not even during the transit strike, when half the fleet didn't show up. One morning, as the bus cruised through the Naval Base District, a young man in fresh camis stepped on board. Posture razor straight. Hair cut so recently the air still smelled of talcum powder. "Good morning, sir," the recruit said instinctively. Thomas glanced at the rearview mirror, then back to the road. No reply. The recruit sat near the front, curious. He studied the man at the wheel, the way his eyes flicked constantly to the mirrors, his hands resting lightly but firmly on the controls. He noticed the subtle straightening of Thomas's back before each turn, like a pilot prepping for flight. At the Market Street stop, an elderly woman struggled to board, her grocery bag splitting open mid-step. Without hesitation, Thomas set the brake, opened the door manually, and knelt to gather her apples. No words, no fuss, just quiet precision. The recruit watched closely. Something didn't add up. This man didn't move like a retiree killing time. He moved like a professional. Most passengers never noticed. They stared at phones or dozed against the glass. They saw gray hair, calloused hands, but not much else. The recruit saw more. Hands too scarred for a desk job. Posture too precise for casual comfort. The way he scanned each new passenger like assessing threats and escape routes. It wasn't paranoia. It was muscle memory. The next morning, the recruit boarded again and sat where sunlight beamed through the window. As the bus turned, light caught the old man's forearm. There it was, an eagle, an anchor, a trident. The recruit waited until the front emptied. Then he leaned forward and asked softly, "Sir, were you in?" The engine hummed. The light turned green. A long pause. Then, without turning, Thomas said, "I was." 2 words, but they carried weight. The ride continued in silence, no longer the silence of strangers, but of shared understanding. Time didn't erase brotherhood. It only hid it beneath layers of quiet. That afternoon, whispers spread like wildfire through group chats and barracks halls. "The old guy driving bus 12, he's a SEAL. Swear to God, Harper saw the trident." Within days, someone posted a blurry photo on a Navy subreddit. "Anyone recognize this ink?" Legend says he's a former frogman driving bus 12 in Coronado. A retired chief petty officer, Marcus Denton, saw the post and paused. Something clicked. A name, a rumor, a reputation. He made a call. That Saturday, when Bus 12 pulled up to the naval base, 8 recruits stood in formation at the stop. They boarded quietly, respectfully. One started to salute before catching himself. Thomas said nothing, but he held each gaze a second longer. Monday arrived. Lieutenant Colonel James Westfield, Naval Intelligence and SEAL historian, stepped aboard in full-dress uniform. The bus went silent. He stood beside the driver. "Permission to ride, sir." Thomas exhaled slowly, finally meeting the man's eyes. "You got a seat, Colonel." Westfield sat behind him and, after several quiet miles, spoke again. "I reviewed the files, Commander Griggs. SEAL Team 2, 3 tours, Bronze Star with Valor, MIA twice, completed the mission both times, despite injuries." Thomas's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "That man retired a long time ago." "With respect, sir," Westfield replied, "that's not how it works. You know that better than anyone." Word was out. Commander Thomas Griggs, the man behind the wheel, had led some of the most high-risk operations in Vietnam. His records were mostly classified, his reputation untouchable, but the man himself refused to speak of it. By midweek, the first base stop had 15 silent military passengers waiting. They boarded quietly, nodding. No one dared speak. Thomas drove exactly as before, focused, silent, controlled. As they approached the facility, he caught Harper's reflection in the mirror. "Maintain your situational awareness during night exercises," he said. "That's where most recruits fail." Harper blinked, stunned by both the advice and the recognition. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." Thomas turned back to the road. His sleeve, still rolled to just below the elbow, no longer tried to hide the tattoo. But he didn't flaunt it either. Some truths don't need announcement. They simply are. The story rippled out quietly. A local reporter approached Thomas after a shift. "Commander Griggs, your story could inspire a generation." "No interviews," Thomas replied. "And it's just Thomas now." "But," he turned, "young sailors need to focus on their story, not mine." The reporter never asked again. The transit center installed a discreet bronze plaque beside the route schedule. "To Commander Thomas Griggs, whose silence taught more than speeches ever could." He never mentioned it. But regulars noticed a slight shift in his posture afterward. The bus itself became sacred. Recruits boarded respectfully. They kept it spotless. Civilian passengers often found themselves quieting down, not even knowing why. One morning, a teenager boarded loudly, blasting music and complaining. "Yo, Grandpa, this thing got a turbo or what? Some of us got lives." Before Thomas could react, Harper stood. "Watch your tone," he said quietly but firmly. "That man bled so you could speak freely." The kid went silent. In the mirror, Thomas gave Harper the smallest of nods. Eventually, the Naval Preparatory School invited Thomas to speak at graduation. He declined. His handwritten note was framed in the commanding officer's office. "Some of the best men I knew never made it home. Don't salute me. Salute them." Time passed. One day, Thomas's bus showed up with a different driver. No announcement, no explanation. He was gone for 3 days. On the 4th day, he returned. Same boots, same silence. But behind his seat now sat a folded American flag in a triangular case. No one asked, but they all understood. Harper took off his cap and held it to his chest the entire ride. Others followed. No words spoken, but every seat knew. Someone had gone home for the last time. Thomas continued for 3 more years. Every turn, every stop, precise as ever. New recruits began to view a ride on Bus 12 as a rite of passage. His legend wasn't about fame. It was about presence. Finally, the transit authority announced his retirement. He requested no ceremony. But that morning, Bus 12 pulled up to find every seat filled, not just with recruits, but veterans, officers, sailors, all in civilian clothes, all sitting in silence. As the bus rolled through its final route, no one spoke. At the depot, buses formed a quiet semicircle. In the center stood a small stone monument. "Heroes don't announce themselves, they just drive the route every day." Thomas read it once, then nodded. He collected his duffel, stepped off the bus, and found passengers lined on both sides of the path. No salutes, no applause, just perfect attention as he passed. At the edge of the lot stood Harper, now an officer. "Need a ride, Commander?" Thomas paused, then nodded. "Appreciate it, Lieutenant." A photographer from the base captured the moment. A weathered man with a duffel walking away from a bus, flanked by a silent line of warriors standing tall. The photo went viral. The caption said simply, "Commander Thomas Griggs, SEAL Team 2, never needed a stage, just a steering wheel." The legend faded from daily talk, but at the naval base, every new recruit still hears the story during orientation. Excellence isn't about recognition, the instructors say. It's about doing what needs to be done, whether anyone sees you or not. Just like the man who drove Bus 12. Subscribe to Ironheart Stories if you believe real honor rides in silence.